Cash crops not responsible for India Bengal famine. Yes, the percentage of cash crops in agriculture in the region of Bengal today is higher than it was during the Bengal famine of 1943. Only about 1 to 2% of agriculture in Bengal in 1942 was cash crops. The vast majority of agriculture in Bengal was devoted to food crops, such as rice. Today, the percentage of cash crops in agriculture in the region of Bengal is estimated to be around 10 to 15%. This is a significant increase from the level during the Bengal famine. There are a number of reasons for this increase. One reason is that the economy of Bengal has diversified in recent decades, with a growing emphasis on manufacturing and services. As a result, farmers are less dependent on cash crops for their income. However, cash crops are still important to the region's economy, as they can generate significant income for farmers and the region as a whole. Another reason for the increase in cash crops is that the government of West Bengal is working to promote the cultivation of these crops. The government believes that cash crops can help to boost the region's economy and create jobs. However, it is important to note that the government of West Bengal is also aware of the importance of food security. The government is taking steps to ensure that the state has a sufficient supply of food crops. For example, the government is providing subsidies to farmers who grow food crops. No, cash crops are not responsible for the Bengal famine of 1943. The famine was caused by a combination of factors, including crop failure. The monsoon rains failed in 1942, leading to widespread crop failure. Japanese occupation. Japan occupied Burma in 1942, cutting off Bengal's supply of rice imports. British policies. The British government reduced food supplies exports away from Bengal to help alleviate food shortage. The British also imposed a policy of reduced rice exports from Bengal, since the region was facing a famine. Cash crops played a minor role in the Bengal famine, but they were not the primary cause. In fact, cash crops may have benefited farmers who were able to purchase rice at inflated prices as a result of war profiteering by Hindu merchants. Cash crops were grown on a small percentage of agricultural land in Bengal, and they were not a major source of food for the population. The Bengal famine is a reminder of the importance of food security. The Government of India Act, 1935 was a landmark piece of legislation that introduced provincial autonomy to India. The Act gave provincial governments the power to legislate and administer on a wide range of subjects, including agriculture production and distribution. Prior to the 1935 Act, agriculture was a subject under the control of the central government. This meant that the central Indian government had the power to make laws and policies governing agriculture production and distribution. This system was seen as being unfair to local Indian farmers, as the central government was not always responsive to their needs. The 1935 Act gave provincial governments the power to legislate and administer on agriculture production and distribution. This meant that provincial Indian governments could now make laws and policies that were tailored to the specific needs of their farmers. This was a significant step forward for Indian agriculture, as it gave local farmers more control over their own destiny. The provincial Indian governments used their new powers to introduce a number of reforms in agriculture production and distribution. These reforms included investing in irrigation infrastructure. Irrigation is essential for agriculture production in India. The provincial governments invested heavily in irrigation infrastructure, such as canals and wells. This helped to increase agricultural production and make it more resilient to droughts. Providing subsidies to farmers. The provincial governments provided subsidies to farmers for inputs such as seeds, fertilizer, and pesticide. This helped to reduce the cost of production for farmers and made agriculture more profitable. Improving market access for farmers. The provincial governments built roads and railways to improve market access for farmers. This helped to farmers to get their produce to market more efficiently and to get a better price for their crops. The reforms introduced by the provincial governments led to a significant increase in agricultural production in India. Between 1937 and 1947, agricultural production increased by an average of 3% per year. This increase in production helped to improve food security in India and to reduce poverty. The provincial autonomy granted by the 1935 Act was a major step forward for Indian agriculture. It gave provincial governments the power to introduce reforms that were tailored to the specific needs of their farmers. These reforms led to a significant increase in agricultural production and helped to improve food security in India. The Hindu majority government of Bengal was elected in 1940, but it was boycotted by the Muslim League, which represented the interests of the Muslim minority. The Muslim League was led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was campaigning for a separate Muslim homeland in India which would later become Pakistan. The Hindu minority government was kicked out of office in November 1942, following a campaign by the Muslim League and other Muslim groups. The campaign accused the Hindu government of mishandling the Bengal famine, which had begun in 1942. The Bengal famine was a major humanitarian disaster that resulted in the deaths of millions of people. The famine was caused by a combination of factors, including crop failure, Japanese occupation, and British policies to focus on the war effort that exacerbated the crisis. The Hindu minority government of Bengal was criticized for its slow response to the famine. The government was initially reluctant to admit that there was a famine, and it did not take steps to provide adequate relief to the affected population. The government's policies were also seen as favoring the Hindu minority over the Muslim majority. The Muslim League and other Muslim groups capitalized on the Hindu minority government's mishandling of the famine to launch a campaign to remove the government from office. The campaign was successful, and the Hindu government was forced to resign in November 1942. The dismissal of the Hindu government was a major setback for Hindu-Muslim relations in Bengal. It also contributed to the growing demand for a separate Muslim homeland in India. The Bengal famine and its aftermath played a significant role in the partition of India in 1947. It is important to note that there are different perspectives on the dismissal of the Hindu government of Bengal in 1942. Some historians argue that the government was dismissed for its mishandling of the Bengal famine. Others argue that the government was dismissed as part of a broader Muslim League campaign to gain more political power. It is estimated that if the Hindu majority government of Bengal had responded just 6 weeks earlier to the Bengal famine of 1943, millions of deaths could have been avoided. The famine was caused by a complex combination of factors, including crop failure, Japanese occupation, and British wartime policies that exacerbated the crisis. However, it is clear that the Hindu minority government of Bengal's slow and inadequate response to the famine played a major role in the high number of deaths. The Hindu minority government was initially reluctant to admit that there was a famine, and it did not take steps to provide adequate relief to the affected population until it was too late. By the time the Muslim majority government began to provide relief, millions of people had already died. It is difficult to say with certainty how many deaths could have been avoided if the government had responded earlier. However, some historians estimate that the death toll could have been reduced by as much as half. There are a number of reasons why the Hindu government of Bengal responded so slowly to the famine. One reason is that the government was preoccupied with the Second World War, which was underway at the time. Another reason for the Hindu minority government's slow response is that it was dominated by upper caste Hindus, who were largely out of touch with the plight of the poor and lower caste Hindus who were most affected by the famine. The Bengal famine is a complex and controversial event. There are a number of different perspectives on the causes of the famine and the government's response. However, there is no doubt that the Hindu minority government of Bengal's slow and inadequate response to the famine played a major role in the high number of deaths. The Bengal famine of 1943 was a dark chapter in Indian history. It is estimated that millions of people died, many of whom could have been saved if the Hindu minority government of Bengal had responded just 6 weeks earlier. Imagine a world where the Hindu minority government had acted more quickly. Imagine a world where millions of people had lived to see the end of the Second World War and the independence of India. Imagine a world where the Bengal famine had not left such a deep scar on the collective memory of the Indian people. It is a world that could have been. Prior to the Government of India Act, 1935, the central government of India was governed by Indians, not British. However, the central Indian government was not responsible for agriculture. Agriculture was a subject under the control of the provincial governments. This system was introduced in 1861 by the British government. The British government believed that it was more efficient to have provincial governments responsible for agriculture, as they were closer to the needs of the farmers. The Government of India Act, 1935 introduced provincial autonomy to India. This meant that provincial governments were given more power to legislate and administer on a wide range of subjects, including agriculture. The Act also introduced a central government that was responsible for a number of subjects, including defense, foreign affairs, and communications. However, agriculture remained a subject under the control of the provincial governments. The system of provincial autonomy introduced by the Government of India Act, 1935 lasted until India gained independence in 1947. After independence, the central government of India assumed responsibility for agriculture. Unfortunately, the British government's decision to give control of Indian agriculture to the local Indians had a devastating impact on the Indian economy and society. It led to widespread poverty and hunger. And it contributed to the decline of Indian agriculture. But what if things had been different? What if the British government had taken control of Indian agriculture? What if Indian farmers had always been free to grow the crops they wanted and to sell their produce to the highest bidder? In such a world, Indian agriculture would be a thriving sector of the Indian economy. It would be a source of jobs, income, and revenue for the country. And it would help to ensure India's food security.